It started with a single unsigned document quietly circulating through Sandringham House just before dawn, a document that reportedly authorized the removal and sale of several of Queen Elizabeth II's favourite horses. But before the transport teams could move a single animal, Princess Anne arrived at the Norfolk estate with what insiders later described as an unforgiving royal veto. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Stable staff fell silent. Advisors reportedly panicked. And suddenly, a private financial decision became a full-scale palace confrontation. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, the Sandringham stables had existed as more than just another royal property expense hidden behind palace ledgers and estate reports. To Queen Elizabeth, the horses represented continuity, discipline, and memory. They were among the few parts of royal life she trusted completely, even during the final years when family divisions, public scandals, and internal betrayals quietly shook the monarchy from within. That is why whispers of a discreet financial restructuring sent such shockwaves through palace circles. According to sources tied closely to estate operations, discussions had allegedly been taking place behind closed doors for weeks. The proposal sounded practical on paper. Reduce equestrian costs. Streamline maintenance. Quietly sell several aging horses connected to the late Queen's private collection. No public announcement. No dramatic statement. Just signatures, transport schedules, and silence. But silence inside royal households rarely stays silent for long. Staff members reportedly began noticing strange activity near the stables late at night. Vehicles arriving without explanation. Conversations abruptly ending whenever long-time workers approached. Some stable hands allegedly believed renovations were being planned. Others suspected changes to staffing. Yet underneath the confusion was a growing tension nobody could explain. Then came the moment that changed everything. Princess Anne, known within palace walls for her fierce loyalty to tradition and her almost military sense of duty, reportedly received word through trusted estate contacts that several of her mother's beloved horses had already been unofficially marked for removal. What happened next stunned even seasoned royal aides. Anne did not respond with quiet diplomacy. She reportedly arrived at Sandringham personally, demanding immediate clarification from advisors overseeing estate management. Insiders claim the Princess Royal viewed the entire arrangement as not merely insensitive, but dangerously symbolic. To her, these horses were not assets sitting on a spreadsheet waiting to be liquidated. They were living reminders of Queen Elizabeth's identity, her routines, her private joy. Her emotional refuge during decades of constitutional pressure and personal heartbreak. Selling them quietly, without meaningful family consultation, allegedly crossed a line Anne could not tolerate. One source even claimed she described the proposal as deeply disrespectful to the late monarch's memory, words that reportedly sent shockwaves through those present at the estate meeting. And suddenly, what began as an internal cost-cutting discussion evolved into something far more explosive. Because beneath the arguments over stable budgets and estate planning was a far more dangerous question nobody wanted spoken aloud. Who now had the authority to redefine Queen Elizabeth's legacy? Was the monarchy entering a colder, more corporate era where emotional history could be erased for efficiency? Or would senior royals like Anne draw a hard line against those changes before the institution lost the very traditions that once gave it meaning? Palace insiders reportedly noticed alliances beginning to form almost immediately. Some advisors quietly backed modernization. Others feared public outrage if details ever leaked beyond palace grounds. Meanwhile, Anne's intervention reportedly halted all movement connected to the proposed sales, at least temporarily. But the tension did not disappear. If anything, it deepened. Because the real battle was never just about horses, it was about who truly controlled the sacred legacy Queen Elizabeth left behind. Long before headlines exploded across Britain, Sandringham had already become one of the monarchy's most emotionally guarded sanctuaries. Purchased in 1862 for the future King Edward VII, the sprawling Norfolk estate carried memories that stretched across generations of Windsor triumphs, grief, and private healing. Yet among its most protected treasures were not jewels or paintings, but the horses Queen Elizabeth adored in the final years of her reign. And according to various interpretations of palace discussions, those horses represented something far more dangerous than sentimental value. For decades, Sandringham existed as the place where the monarchy escaped itself. Away from the endless calculations of Westminster, away from cameras dissecting every gesture, the estate became a refuge where monarchs could temporarily step out of the suffocating machinery of royal expectation. Generations of the royal family walked its grounds, carrying burdens the public would never fully understand. Kings prepared for uncertain futures there. Queens mourned losses there. And in the middle of that deeply guarded emotional world stood the stables. Quiet but powerful, holding traditions that reached far beyond sport or leisure. To Queen Elizabeth II, horses were never simply companions or ceremonial symbols. They were stability. They were discipline. They were continuity in a family where loyalty often shifted like shadows behind closed palace doors. Even during the final years of her reign, when age and exhaustion reportedly weighed heavily upon her, the late Queen's connection to breeding traditions never disappeared. Palace insiders often whispered that conversations about bloodlines, racing prospects, and stable updates remained among the few subjects capable of fully reigniting her spirit. Some of the horses still housed at Sandringham allegedly carried bloodlines she had personally overseen for years, linking them directly to decisions she made long before many current palace advisors ever entered royal service. That detail mattered enormously within royal circles because those animals were increasingly viewed not as property, but as living extensions of Elizabeth's legacy itself. Royal historians privately described the Sandringham stables as part of the monarchy's living heritage, a phrase that quietly carried enormous weight. Paintings could be archived, jewellery could be locked away, but these horses still breathed with the memory of the Queen's personal devotion. And that is precisely why tensions surrounding the estate reportedly became so explosive behind palace walls. As King Charles faced growing health concerns and the pressures of maintaining multiple royal properties intensified, insiders claim private conversations about finances became increasingly urgent. Advisors reportedly began reviewing long-standing expenses with a colder, more corporate mindset. The monarchy, despite its grandeur, was still an institution facing enormous operational costs, and some believed difficult decisions could no longer be delayed. Yet within those tense discussions, dangerous divisions allegedly started to emerge. One faction reportedly argued that emotional attachments could not continue dictating financial strategy in a modern monarchy struggling to maintain public support and internal stability. Another faction viewed that thinking as a direct threat to the sacred traditions that gave the crown its meaning in the first place. And beneath every conversation lurked an even more uncomfortable truth. Nobody dared speak openly. Queen Elizabeth's death had not only created emotional loss, it had created a silent power vacuum over how her private world would now be preserved, interpreted, or dismantled. Every object, every estate decision, every symbolic gesture suddenly carried political consequences within the family itself. What some saw as practical management, others allegedly viewed as betrayal. Trusted staff reportedly became cautious about whom they spoke to. Long-time palace relationships reportedly began straining under pressure. And as whispers about the future of Sandringham's stables spread deeper through royal circles, insiders claim one figure kept appearing at the center of increasingly tense private meetings. Because as the financial debates intensified behind palace walls, one name reportedly kept resurfacing in increasingly tense private meetings: Queen Camilla. By the time the proposal finally reached senior royal circles, insiders claim the atmosphere inside Clarence House had already become explosive. Reports suggest advisors connected to the king's household had quietly floated the idea of downsizing portions of the Sandringham equestrian operation as part of a broader modernization effort. But what looked like a simple financial adjustment quickly transformed into something far more dangerous once Princess Anne allegedly discovered which horses were included on the confidential list. According to palace whispers that spread rapidly through private corridors and staff offices, several of the animals marked for possible sale were not random selections chosen for age or expense. These were horses deeply connected to Queen Elizabeth's final chapter as monarch. Some had reportedly accompanied her through emotionally significant moments during the closing years of her reign, years already shadowed by grief, declining health, and mounting internal tensions within the royal family itself. Others were allegedly tied to ceremonial milestones that carried enormous symbolic weight behind palace walls. To outside observers, they may have looked like part of a royal collection. But to Anne, and to many who had spent decades protecting royal traditions, these horses represented something far more personal. They were pieces of her mother's memory still living inside the institution. That realization reportedly changed everything. Sources close to palace operations claim Anne became immediately furious, not only because of the proposed sales themselves, but because she allegedly believed critical royal protocol had been bypassed in the process. Within the monarchy, symbolism matters almost as much as law. Decisions tied to the late Queen's personal legacy were expected to involve careful consultation among senior family members, particularly those who had remained closest to Elizabeth throughout her life. Yet according to various interpretations of the dispute, Anne felt those protections had been quietly ignored in favour of efficiency, optics, and financial pressure. That perception reportedly transformed what could have remained a discreet estate adjustment into a deeply emotional power struggle unfolding behind closed doors. And the timing could not have been worse. King Charles was already navigating enormous strain. Public expectations weighed heavily on him, while concerns surrounding his health reportedly intensified internal anxieties about the monarchy's future stability. Advisors pushed for modernization. Financial reviews expanded. Household budgets came under sharper examination than ever before. Some insiders allegedly argued the royal family needed to appear leaner, more disciplined, and less emotionally attached to costly traditions if it hoped to survive an increasingly skeptical modern climate. But critics inside palace circles reportedly viewed that argument with growing alarm, particularly when whispers began linking Camilla's wider household network to the push for aggressive cost-cutting measures. Those whispers spread carefully, but relentlessly. According to royal insiders, some aides privately feared the entire situation could spiral into a public disaster if details leaked beyond palace walls. The optics alone were dangerous. The thought of Queen Elizabeth's beloved horses being quietly sold during a period of royal uncertainty threatened to ignite emotional backlash among royal loyalists, already uneasy about how rapidly the monarchy seemed to be changing after her death. Staff members reportedly became increasingly nervous about press exposure. Conversations turned cautious. Trust inside certain departments allegedly began to fracture. Meanwhile, Anne's resistance only hardened. Palace sources claim she viewed the proposed sale as part of a much larger battle over what kind of monarchy would survive Queen Elizabeth's passing, a monarchy rooted in memory, duty, and continuity, or one reshaped by strategy, image management, and institutional survival. And while advisors continued debating budgets, optics, and damage control inside increasingly tense meetings, Princess Anne was already moving beyond outrage toward action. Because behind the silence, behind the controlled royal statements and carefully managed appearances, she was reportedly preparing a counter-offensive few inside the palace expected. Those familiar with palace operations often describe Princess Anne as the monarchy's final line of defense, a woman capable of turning silence into bureaucratic warfare overnight. And according to persistent royal whispers, that was exactly what happened at Sandringham. Within hours of learning about the alleged sale plan, Anne reportedly activated what insiders later nicknamed the Equerry Protection Protocol, a devastating administrative counterstrike designed to halt every movement connected to the horses until further review could be completed. The reaction inside royal circles was immediate. Stable managers allegedly received direct instructions, freezing all transportation arrangements connected to the proposed removals. Communications regarding transfers reportedly stopped without warning. Staff who had been preparing logistical paperwork suddenly found themselves ordered to suspend every discussion tied to the horses until senior consultations could take place. According to sources close to the estate, confusion spread rapidly because very few people had ever seen such a forceful intervention unfold so quickly. Anne, known for avoiding theatrical displays, was reportedly operating with cold precision instead of public emotion. That alone terrified palace aides. Because when the Princess Royal stopped speaking softly, insiders knew the situation had already crossed into dangerous territory. What made the confrontation even more explosive was the legal dimension reportedly unfolding behind the scenes. Royal legal advisors were allegedly drawn into urgent consultations almost immediately after Anne's intervention began. Questions reportedly surfaced over whether Queen Elizabeth had left behind informal preservation wishes tied specifically to Sandringham's stables and breeding traditions. While no public documentation ever confirmed such instructions, insiders claim Anne firmly believed her mother's intentions regarding the horses had always been understood within the family, even if they were never formally written into rigid estate policy. To Anne, that understanding mattered, perhaps more than any balance sheet ever could. And suddenly, the monarchy's internal battle stopped looking like a disagreement over expenses. It became a war over loyalty. Palace insiders claim Anne viewed herself not merely as a grieving daughter, but as the protector of Queen Elizabeth's final legacy. That role reportedly drove her into one of the fiercest internal standoffs the royal family had experienced in years. Staff members allegedly described an atmosphere where every conversation carried tension. Departments that normally operated with polished coordination reportedly became fractured by quiet suspicion. Some advisors allegedly feared Anne's intervention risked undermining King Charles's broader modernization goals. Others privately supported her, convinced the palace was moving too quickly to erase traditions that still anchored public respect for the crown. But regardless of where loyalty stood, one reality reportedly became impossible to ignore. The conflict was no longer hidden, and neither were the divisions surrounding Queen Camilla's influence. According to various royal whispers, tensions between competing royal households became increasingly visible as the crisis deepened. Critics allegedly accused members connected to Camilla's wider circle of prioritizing financial optics over emotional responsibility. Supporters of modernization reportedly pushed back, insisting the monarchy could not survive indefinitely by preserving every costly symbol of the past. Yet that argument only intensified Anne's determination. To her allies, the issue was never simply about money, it was about identity. If Queen Elizabeth's most cherished traditions could be quietly dismantled behind closed doors so soon after her death, what would remain untouched in the years ahead? That question reportedly haunted even long-time palace staff, because Anne's intervention did more than stop transport schedules and freeze estate paperwork. It exposed how fragile the monarchy's internal unity had become after Elizabeth's passing. The institution that once revolved around one steady figure now appeared increasingly vulnerable to competing visions, competing loyalties, and competing ambitions. And according to insiders, the deeper Anne pushed into the details surrounding the proposed sales, the more disturbing the situation allegedly became. Because stopping the sale was only the beginning, what she reportedly uncovered next threatened to pull the entire palace conflict into even darker territory. What began as a dispute over horses soon transformed into something far more dangerous, a bitter struggle over influence, loyalty, and the future identity of the monarchy itself. Behind palace walls, insiders claim Sandringham became the center of a growing civil war between two visions of the crown. On one side stood Princess Anne and the Old Guard, fiercely protecting Queen Elizabeth's traditions as sacred parts of royal duty. On the other stood advisors pushing King Charles toward modernization, insisting the monarchy could no longer survive under the weight of emotional attachment and costly legacy systems. Suddenly, this was no longer about stable budgets or estate management. It was about whether the House of Windsor would preserve its soul or slowly trade it away for efficiency and survival. According to royal whispers, Anne viewed the entire conflict as a defining moral test. To her, loyalty to the late Queen could not be measured against financial convenience. Some family allies reportedly agreed in silence, supporting Anne privately while avoiding open confrontation with the King's advisors. But inside palace operations, tensions allegedly became impossible to hide. Staff morale reportedly suffered as fear, uncertainty, and suspicion spread through royal households already strained by grief and transition. Royal commentators even compared the crisis to earlier inheritance battles that erupted quietly after Queen Elizabeth's passing, warning that unresolved divisions inside the monarchy were becoming increasingly dangerous. And at the centre of it all stood King Charles himself, reportedly torn between practical pressure and emotional loyalty to his mother's memory. Then came the moment insiders claim changed everything. Faced with growing unrest behind palace walls and the looming threat of public backlash, King Charles reportedly made a deeply personal decision. According to various interpretations of the final Sandringham meetings, the proposed horse sales were quietly suspended indefinitely. The order allegedly stunned both sides of the conflict. Princess Anne reportedly received direct assurances regarding the future of the Sandringham stables, a move many royal observers interpreted as a major symbolic victory for the old guard protecting Queen Elizabeth's legacy. Sources close to palace operations claim Charles ultimately realised that forcing the sales forward risked damaging not only family unity, but the emotional bond many people still felt toward the late Queen herself. Yet even as the immediate crisis faded from public view, the scars reportedly remained. Certain advisors were said to be frustrated that emotion had overruled modernization efforts, while Anne's supporters believed they had prevented the monarchy from crossing a line it could never uncross. And so the Sandringham horses became something far greater than royal property. They became symbols of continuity during one of the most uncertain transitions in modern royal history. But inside palace corridors, whispers reportedly never fully disappeared. Because beneath the fragile calm, many feared the deeper battle over Queen Elizabeth's legacy and the future direction of the monarchy itself was only just beginning. Weeks after the confrontation reportedly ended, Sandringham returned to its familiar silence. But insiders claim something inside the estate had permanently changed. The transport plans vanished. The horses remained in their stables. Officially, the crisis faded without explanation. Yet behind palace walls, whispers allegedly continued long after the paperwork disappeared. Staff members who witnessed the internal struggle reportedly spoke carefully, almost cautiously, about how close the monarchy came to crossing a line Queen Elizabeth had spent decades defending. Because in royal history, the greatest battles are rarely fought in public. They unfold quietly behind estate gates, through private meetings, frozen signatures, and silent administrative warfare hidden beneath polished ceremony. According to royal commentators, the Sandringham dispute became far more than an argument over estate management. It became a warning, a glimpse into the growing conflict between preserving royal legacy and reshaping the monarchy for survival in a rapidly changing world. Stable workers allegedly viewed the halted sale as a victory for tradition, proof that some parts of Queen Elizabeth's deeply personal world could still be protected from modernization pressures. But inside palace operations, tensions reportedly remained unresolved. Relationships between competing royal households were said to have grown colder, while advisors privately feared similar inheritance disputes could erupt again during future restructuring efforts. And at the centre of it all stood Princess Anne. Long respected for her discipline and loyalty, Anne reportedly emerged from the controversy with even stronger support among royal traditionalists who viewed her as the monarchy's final guardian of continuity. Unlike louder royal figures who often dominated headlines, Anne's influence had always operated quietly, almost invisibly. Yet this confrontation allegedly revealed just how powerful that influence remained behind palace walls. Royal historians framed the Sandringham horses not as financial assets, but as emotional symbols tied directly to Queen Elizabeth's reign, symbols Anne refused to let disappear without a fight. To her supporters, the battle was never truly about horses. It was about protecting memory itself. Observers also claimed the crisis exposed how fragile palace unity had quietly become after Queen Elizabeth's death. The monarchy survived the confrontation, but not without revealing deep fractures over its future direction. Some insiders reportedly believed King Charles's reign was increasingly trapped between two competing realities, honoring the emotional traditions that defined his mother's era, while confronting mounting pressure to modernize the institution for survival. Sandringham, once seen simply as a private royal sanctuary, had suddenly become the symbol of that collision. And perhaps that was the most haunting part of all. Because reports surrounding Princess Anne's intervention may never be fully confirmed by Buckingham Palace, yet the symbolism proved impossible to erase. To Anne, the Queen's horses were never merely animals attached to an estate ledger. They were living fragments of Queen Elizabeth herself. Protecting them meant protecting continuity, loyalty, and the emotional identity of a monarchy struggling to redefine itself after the loss of its longest-serving sovereign. And as the palace moved cautiously forward, one reality reportedly became impossible to ignore. The era of silent royal disagreements was rapidly disappearing, because inside the House of Windsor, legacy is never truly inherited. Peacefully it is defended, protected, and sometimes fought for in silence. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.